What you do when your stepmother erases you from your father's will, fires you from his nonprofit, and calls you dead weight in God's house. You stay silent, build an empire, and show up at her foreclosure auction as the highest bidder. If you believe everyone should have the courage to stand up when no one else will, then tell me, where are you and what time is it right now as you watch me? I love finding out where you, my audience, are listening from. Comment your city below, subscribe and like the video. You help our stories reach more people who agree that the world needs more kindness around. Thank you for this. Now let's begin. The cardboard box wasn't heavy. Just a coffee mug with "World's Best Daughter" printed in faded letters, a framed photo of her father in his Sunday suit, and a folded resignation letter she'd never had the chance to turn in herself. Rebecca Tomlin, Becca to the few who still called her by name, walked down the marble corridor of the Tomlin Community Outreach Center with her head high and her heart somewhere near her shoes. The heels of her black pumps clicked against the polished floor, each step echoing in the vaulted ceiling like a countdown. Behind her, whispers slithered through the open office doors. That's her stepdaughter. Heard she got fired. By her own stepmother. She doesn't even look upset. Becca didn't turn around. She'd learned long ago that tears were currency in Madame Tanisha Tomlin's world, and she refused to spend hers where they wouldn't be valued. The lobby stretched before her like a cathedral. Floor-to-ceiling windows let in streams of autumn light that turned the marble gold. A bronze plaque hung near the entrance, in loving memory of Jerome Tomlin, a man of faith, service, and love. Her father's face smiled from the etched portrait. She paused, just for a second, and touched the edge of the plaque with her free hand. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered. The glass doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the October air hit her face, cool, sharp, honest. She stepped outside, leaving behind the warmth of a building her father built, the legacy her stepmother seized, and the last shred of hope that family meant anything more than blood on paper. 3 weeks earlier, everything had still looked normal, at least from the outside. Becca sat in the back row of Greater Faith Deliverance Church, watching her stepmother command the pulpit like a general surveying a battlefield. Madame Tanisha wore white, always white, her silver jewelry catching the stage lights as she raised her hands toward heaven. My husband, Jerome Tomlin, was a man who believed in redemption. Her voice boomed through the sanctuary. He believed that even the lost could be found. Even the broken could be made whole. The congregation erupted in applause. Becca's hands stayed folded in her lap. Tanisha's eyes swept the crowd, pausing, just briefly, on Becca. A flicker of something cold passed between them before the pastor's smile returned, warm and radiant for everyone else. And that's why Tanisha continued, "I'm expanding the outreach center in his honor. We'll be hiring more staff, serving more families, touching more lives. Because that's what Jerome would have wanted. More applause. More amens." Becca looked down at her father's watch on her wrist, the only thing of his she'd managed to keep. It had stopped working the day he died, frozen at 11:47 a.m. She hadn't had the heart to get it fixed. Some things were meant to stay broken. After the service, Tanisha swept past her without a word, surrounded by deacons and board members. Becca gathered her Bible and purse, preparing to slip out the side door like she always did. "Rebecca." She froze. That voice, smooth as silk, sharp as a blade. Tanisha stood at the top of the stairs, backlit by stained glass. "My office. Tomorrow morning. 9 sharp." It wasn't a request. The next morning, Becca arrived at 8:55 a.m., coffee in hand, wearing the navy dress her father always said made her look professional. She knocked twice on the heavy oak door. "Come in." Tanisha sat behind her father's old desk, the one he'd refinished himself, the one that still smelled faintly of lemon oil and pipe tobacco. She didn't look up from the papers she was signing. "Sit." Becca sat. Tanisha finally raised her eyes. "I'm restructuring the organization, cutting unnecessary positions, streamlining operations." Becca's stomach tightened. "I understand. I'm glad." Tanisha slid a manila envelope across the desk. "Your services are no longer needed. Effective immediately." The words landed like stones. Becca stared at the envelope, then at the woman who'd raised her since she was 12. The woman who'd stood beside her father at PTA meetings and birthday dinners. The woman who'd promised, at his funeral, that Becca would always have a home. "Madame Tanisha, there's no room for dead weight in God's house, Rebecca." Her voice was flat, final. Your father may have coddled you, but I have a legacy to protect. Becca felt something inside her crack. Not break, just crack. Like ice on a frozen lake, waiting for the right pressure to shatter completely. She stood slowly, took the envelope, and walked to the door. Rebecca. She stopped, hand on the doorknob. Leave your key card on the desk. Becca pulled the lanyard from around her neck and set it down gently beside her father's photo, the one Tanisha had already turned face down. She walked out, packed her box, left the building. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the humiliation and the grief, a seed her father planted years ago began to stir in the dark. It wasn't ready to bloom yet, but it was growing. 6 months before the firing, Madame Tanisha Tomlin sat in the cushioned chair of Studio 7's morning talk show. Her white blazer pressed to perfection, her smile practiced and serene. Tell us, Madame Tanisha. The host leaned forward with genuine admiration. How do you balance running a thriving church, managing a nonprofit, and grieving the loss of your beloved husband? Tanisha dabbed at the corner of her eye with a handkerchief, embroidered with her initials. It's not easy, Deborah. But Jerome wouldn't want me to stop. He built that outreach center to serve the broken, the forgotten. I'm just continuing his mission. The audience applauded. The camera zoomed in on her face, flawless makeup, controlled emotion, the picture of dignified grief. What the camera didn't show was what happened 30 minutes earlier in the green room, when Becca had arrived with Tanisha's forgotten notes. You're late. Tanisha hadn't even looked up from her compact mirror. Traffic on the... I don't pay you to make excuses. Becca's jaw tightened. You don't pay me at all. Tanisha snapped the compact shut. Room and board is payment. Or would you prefer I put you out on the street where you'd actually have to earn your keep? The makeup artist had pretended not to hear. Becca handed over the notes and left without another word. Now, watching from backstage, she saw the woman America loved, the grieving widow, the servant leader, the woman of God. Behind the curtain, Becca saw something else entirely. The house on Winthrop Avenue had once felt like home. Jerome Tomlin had bought it when Becca was 13, after he married Tanisha and wanted to give them all a fresh start. It was a beautiful brownstone with a garden out back and a porch where he'd sit on summer evenings, smoking his pipe and listening to Motown. Now it felt like a museum. Cold, untouchable, full of things you weren't allowed to disturb. Becca moved through it like a ghost. Her bedroom was in the attic, not because there weren't other rooms, but because Tanisha had converted the guest rooms into her prayer closet and wardrobe suite. Becca didn't complain. She'd learned early that complaints were just invitations for lectures. One evening, 2 weeks after the talk show appearance, Becca came home late from her second job, filing paperwork at a legal clinic in Brooklyn. She tried to slip upstairs unnoticed, but the light in the living room was on. Rebecca. She stopped mid-step. Tanisha sat in the high-backed chair near the fireplace, a glass of red wine in her hand. She looked like a queen holding court. Yes, ma'am. Sit. Becca sat on the edge of the couch, her bag still on her shoulder. Tanisha swirled the wine slowly. I had a meeting with the church board today. They're concerned about optics. Optics? About you. Tanisha's eyes flicked over her, cold and assessing. You're 26 years old, Rebecca. No husband. No degree. Working part-time jobs. Living in my house. Daddy's house, Becca said quietly. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Tanisha set the glass down with a soft click. Your father is dead. This is my house now. And if you want to continue living here, you'll remember your place. Becca's hand moved instinctively to her father's watch. She pressed her thumb against the frozen hands. Tanisha noticed. Still wearing that broken thing. It was his. It's junk. Tanisha stood, smoothing her skirt. Just like sentiment. Your father had a soft heart, Rebecca. It's why he kept you around even after your mother abandoned you. But I'm not him. If you want to stay under this roof, you'll earn it. Tomorrow, you start full-time at the center. No pay, just service. That's what Christians do. We serve. She walked past Becca without waiting for a response, her heels clicking toward the staircase. Becca sat alone in the dark, the watch heavy on her wrist. He wouldn't have wanted this, she whispered. At the outreach center, Becca became invisible. She filed paperwork, answered phones, organized donation drives, and scrubbed floors after events. Volunteers praised Tanisha's leadership. Donors wrote generous checks. The local news ran features on the pastor who turned grief into grace. And through it all, Becca worked in the background, unnamed, unnoticed, unpaid. The other staff members were kind, but distant. They knew better than to get too close to the stepdaughter. Association was risky when Madame Tanisha was watching, but people still talked. Becca overheard it one afternoon in the break room. Two older women from the church's hospitality committee, voices low but not low enough. That girl works like a dog and doesn't get a dime. She's lucky to even be in that woman's house, if you ask me. Tanisha could have turned her out after Jerome died. And, she ain't really family. Jerome married her mama, but that woman left when the girl was, 10? Tanisha didn't have to keep her. Charity case, that's what she is. Becca stood on the other side of the door, holding a stack of folders, her breath caught somewhere between anger and shame. She didn't go into the break room. She turned and walked back to her desk, set the folders down carefully, and stared at the computer screen until her vision blurred. Charity case. It was late October when Becca overheard the conversation that changed everything. She'd stayed after hours to finish inventory in the storage room. The center was quiet, most of the lights off. She was heading toward the back exit when she heard voices in Tanisha's office, the door slightly ajar. "I need it done by the end of the month, Lawrence." Becca froze. That was Tanisha's lawyer. "Madam Tomlin, I have to advise you. Rewriting the will now, so soon after Jerome's death, could raise questions. I don't care about questions. I care about protecting his legacy." "Our legacy?" "But his daughter." "Stepdaughter," Tanisha corrected sharply. "And she's not entitled to a single thing. Jerome may have been sentimental, but I'm practical. Everything he built goes to the ministry. That's what he would have wanted if he'd been thinking clearly." Silence. Then Lawrence's voice quieter. "And the business assets, all of it. The sender, the house, the savings. I'm the surviving spouse. It's legal." "It is. But then do it." Becca's heart pounded. She backed away from the door, moving as silently as she could, her father's watch pressing against her pulse like a second heartbeat. Outside, she leaned against the brick wall and looked up at the sky, dark, cold, dotted with stars that felt a million miles away. She touched the watch. "He wouldn't have wanted this," she whispered again. But this time, it wasn't a lament. It was a vow. The law office of Sterling and Associates smelled like old money and older secrets, leather, mahogany, and the faint chemical tang of copy toner. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with legal volumes no one had touched in decades. A crystal chandelier hung overhead, refracting cold November light into 1,000 fractured pieces. Becca sat in the back row of folding chairs, hands clasped in her lap, her father's watch hidden beneath the sleeve of her black dress. Around her, the room buzzed with murmured conversations, church elders, nonprofit board members, distant relatives who'd never called after the funeral but showed up today with eager eyes. And cameras. 2 of them, positioned discreetly in the corners. Tanisha had arranged for a documentary crew to film the reading. For posterity, she'd announced at last Sunday's service. So the world can see how Jerome's legacy lives on. Becca had felt sick when she heard it. Now, sitting here, she felt numb. Tanisha sat in the front row, dressed in cream, soft, angelic, perfectly lit. She dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, though Becca noticed no actual tears. Beside her sat Deacon Morris and First Lady Campbell, flanking her like sentries. Lawrence Chen, Jerome's longtime lawyer, stood at the podium with a leather folder. He looked uncomfortable, his tie slightly askew, his eyes avoiding Becca's completely. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice steady but strained. "We gather today to honor the final wishes of Jerome Michael Tomlin, a man of great faith and generosity." Becca's throat tightened. She could still hear her father's laugh, see him flipping pancakes on Saturday mornings, feel his hand on her shoulder when she graduated high school. "I'm so proud of you, baby girl." Lawrence opened the folder. "I'll now read the last will and testament, executed and notarized on October 14th, just 3 weeks before Mr. Tomlin's passing." 3 weeks. Becca's stomach dropped. Her father had died on November 3rd. She'd been with him that morning, bringing him tea, talking about her latest idea for the cafe. He'd seemed tired but happy. 3 weeks before that, he'd changed his will. Lawrence cleared his throat. "To my beloved wife, Tanisha Marie Tomlin, I leave the family home at 487 Winthrop Avenue, along with all furnishings, vehicles, and personal effects contained therein. Murmurs of approval rippled through the room. Tanisha nodded graciously, as if accepting an award. Additionally, I leave to Tanisha the full operational control and ownership of the Tomlin Community Outreach Center, including all assets, accounts, and intellectual property associated with said organization. More nods. Someone whispered, as it should be. Becca sat perfectly still. Her name hadn't been mentioned yet. Maybe it was coming. Maybe he'd left her something small, a savings bond, a personal item, something to prove she'd mattered. Lawrence continued. I direct that any remaining financial assets, including savings, investments, and life insurance proceeds, be allocated as follows: 70% to Tanisha Marie Tomlin, and 30% to be donated to Greater Faith Deliverance Church in support of their youth ministry programs. Silence. Becca stopped breathing. That was it. The entire estate, divided between Tanisha and the church. Her name gone. Erased. As if she'd never existed. Not even my name, she whispered, barely audible. The woman beside her, some second cousin she'd met once, leaned over and whispered, I'm so sorry, honey. Becca didn't respond. She was staring at the back of Tanisha's head, watching the woman's shoulders rise and fall with what looked like a satisfied sigh. Lawrence folded the document slowly. That concludes the reading of... Wait. Becca's voice cut through the room, sharper than she intended. Every head turned. She stood, her legs unsteady. What about his watch? His personal items? He promised me his watch. Lawrence's face flushed. I'm sorry, Ms. Tomlin. Personal effects were designated to Mrs. Tomlin. She has full discretion over their distribution. Becca looked at Tanisha, who turned slowly in her seat, her expression a masterpiece of manufactured sympathy. Rebecca, sweetheart, Tanisha said, her voice dripping with honey and condescension. Your father wanted his legacy to serve the community. Surely you understand that. I understand that I'm not even mentioned in his will. Becca's voice trembled, but she didn't look away. Not once. Not my name. Not even a sentence. Gasps scattered through the room. One of the cameras swiveled toward her. Tanisha stood, moving with rehearsed grace. She approached Becca, stopping just close enough to appear compassionate on camera. Jerome loved you, she said softly, placing a hand on Becca's arm. Becca flinched but didn't pull away. But he knew that true love means preparing people for independence. He didn't want you dependent on an inheritance. He wanted you to stand on your own. It was a lie delivered with a saint's smile. Becca felt something crack inside her, not break, but splinter, like glass under pressure. Tanisha reached into her purse and pulled out a folded check. She pressed it into Becca's hand. Here, $500. To help you start over. Find your own path. Becca looked down at the check. $500. For 26 years of being someone's daughter. For every Sunday dinner, every school play he attended, every late-night conversation about dreams and purpose. $500. She looked up at Tanisha, and for the first time in years, she let the mask fall. Let Tanisha see the cold, clear fury beneath the grief. You can erase me from paper, Becca said quietly, her voice steady as steel. But you can't erase me from purpose. She let the check flutter to the floor. The room went silent. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Tanisha's smile faltered for just a second, a flicker of something ugly crossing her face before the mask snapped back into place. I'll pray for you, Tanisha said, her voice tight. Becca stepped past her, moving toward the door. Board members whispered. Relatives stared. Someone muttered, ungrateful. She didn't care. She pushed through the heavy oak doors and into the hallway, the sound of camera shutters following her like mechanical vultures. Flashes exploded in her peripheral vision. Photographers who'd been waiting outside, tipped off about drama at the will reading. Ms. Tomlin, how do you feel about being left out? Are you going to contest the will? Do you think your father would have wanted this? She kept walking, her heels echoing on marble, her vision blurred but her path straight. Outside, the November wind bit through her dress. She stood on the courthouse steps, surrounded by strangers with cameras and questions, and felt more alone than she'd ever been in her life. But somewhere deep inside, past the humiliation and the grief, past the public spectacle and private betrayal, that seed her father had planted years ago pushed harder against the dark. It still wasn't ready to bloom. But the roots were spreading. And roots, Becca knew, could break through concrete 7 years earlier. The coffee cart was nothing special, just a repurposed hot dog stand Becca had bought off Craigslist for $300. She'd painted it sage green, stenciled Poor Grace on the side in gold letters, and parked it outside the main library at Queens College every morning at 6. By 7, there'd be a line. Large oat milk latte extra shot. Black coffee, 2 sugars. Do you have any of those lemon scones left? Becca moved behind the tiny counter like a dancer in a phone booth, pulling shots, steaming milk, wrapping pastries she'd baked in her dorm's communal kitchen at 4 a.m. Her business professor had told her she was insane. Her roommate said she'd burn out by midterms. But Jerome had said something different. He'd driven up one October morning in his old Buick, wearing his weekend flannel and work boots. He stood in line like everyone else, waiting his turn, watching his daughter work. When he reached the front, he ordered a black coffee and paid with a 20. "Keep the change, young lady," he said with a wink. Becca had laughed, exhausted and grateful. "Daddy, you don't have to." "I know." He leaned against the cart, voice low enough that only she could hear. "But I want to." "You're building something here, Becca. Something that's yours." She looked around at the line of students, at the steam rising from cups, at the tips jar already half full. "It's just coffee." "No." Jerome shook his head slowly. "It's independence. It's purpose." He tapped the cart's side. "If you ever lose the world, you'll still own a piece of it. Remember that." She hadn't understood what he meant. Not then. 3 months later, he'd taken her to see a lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Wong, who worked out of a tiny office in Flushing. "Your father tells me you're running a business," Patricia had said, sliding papers across her desk. "It's just a cart," Becca had protested. "It's a revenue stream," Jerome corrected. "And revenue streams need protection." That afternoon, they'd filed the LLC paperwork. Poor Grace Cafe, owned entirely by Rebecca Tomlin. Jerome co-signed the bank account to help her get approved, but his name appeared nowhere on the ownership documents. "Why not?" Becca had asked on the drive home. Jerome had smiled, watching the road. "Because this is yours, baby girl. I'm just helping you water the seed." Present day. The Poor Grace Cafe in Astoria didn't look like much from the outside, just a corner storefront with large windows and hanging plants. But inside, it was alive. Becca pushed through the door, and the familiar scent of fresh coffee and vanilla hit her like a warm embrace. The place was packed. Students hunched over laptops, young mothers with strollers, an elderly couple sharing a crossword. Miss Becca, Keisha, the shift manager, came around the counter and pulled her into a fierce hug. She was a single mother of 2 who Becca had hired 3 years ago, when no one else would give her a chance. "I wasn't expecting you today," Keisha said, stepping back with a grin. "Just checking in." Becca glanced around, noting the new menu board, the fresh paint, the line of customers waiting patiently. "Place looks good." "Girl, it looks better than good." Keisha lowered her voice, pulling Becca toward the back office. "We need to talk numbers." Inside the cramped office, really just a converted storage room, Keisha spread out a printout on the desk. "November revenue is up 18%. The new location in Newark is killing it." And she paused for dramatic effect. "We got another inquiry. Someone in Philadelphia wants to discuss a partnership." Becca stared at the numbers, something warm spreading through her chest. "Philadelphia?" They saw the feature in that small business magazine. Said they love what we're doing, hiring folks who need second chances, supporting local suppliers, the whole mission. "That's 5 locations," Becca murmured, more to herself than Keisha. 5 locations in 3 states, Keisha corrected. "You built this, Becca. From a cart to an empire." Empire felt like too big a word. But looking at the spreadsheet, the revenue, the employee count, the community impact, Becca couldn't deny it anymore. Poor Grace wasn't just a coffee shop. It was a movement. And she owned 100% of it through R. Tomlin Holdings, a name so generic that no one, especially not Tanisha, would ever connect it to Rebecca Tomlin. "Does anyone else know?" Keisha asked carefully. Becca shook her head. "Just you, Patricia, and the accountant. And your family?" The word landed like a stone. Becca thought of the will reading, the cameras, the $500 check on the floor. "I don't have family," she said quietly. Keisha squeezed her hand. "Yes, you do. We're your family now." That evening, Becca sat in her modest apartment in Jackson Heights, a one-bedroom she'd rented after leaving Tanisha's house. The space was small but hers. No lectures, no surveillance, no shame. She spread contracts across her kitchen table, lease agreements, franchise applications, expansion proposals. Her laptop glowed with spreadsheets and market analyses. On the wall above her desk hung a single framed photo, her father at the original coffee cart, holding a cup, smiling like she just handed him the world. Beneath it, she'd thumbtacked a post-it note in his handwriting, something he'd scribbled for her during exam week years ago. Grace isn't just forgiveness. It's the power to grow in the dark. She touched her father's watch, still broken, still frozen at 11:47. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia Wong. Philly deal looks solid. We should move fast. You ready? Becca stared at the message, then at the photo, then at the contract spread before her like a map to a future Tanisha couldn't even imagine. She typed back, I'm ready. Outside her window, the city hummed with late-night traffic and distant sirens. Somewhere across town, Tanisha was probably preparing her Sunday sermon, rehearsing her grief, polishing her halo. She had no idea that the girl she'd called a charity case owned more than she ever would. She had no idea that the seed Jerome planted was already bearing fruit. And she definitely had no idea that Becca was just getting started. Becca closed her laptop, poured herself a cup of coffee from her French press, beans from poor Grace's signature roast, and allowed herself the smallest smile. For the first time since her father's funeral, she felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. And beneath it, quiet and patient as winter roots beneath snow, something else was growing too. Something Tanisha would soon learn to call by its proper name. Justice. Chapter 5, Saints and Sinners. The headline on the church's new marquee read, Greater Faith Deliverance, now streaming Sunday services worldwide. Beneath it, construction crews hauled marble slabs and gold-plated fixtures through the front doors. Tanisha had announced the Vision 2.0 expansion at the New Year's service, a multi-million-dollar renovation that would include a television studio, a bookstore, and a prayer garden with imported Italian fountains. We're not just building a church, she proclaimed from the pulpit, arms raised like Moses parting the Red Sea. We're building a beacon of hope for the entire nation. The congregation had erupted in applause. Donations flooded in. Corporate sponsors signed contracts. Tanisha's face appeared on billboards across 3 boroughs. But if you looked closely, and Becca always looked closely, you could see the cracks forming. It started small. Whispers in the church basement. A janitor mentioning he hadn't been paid in 6 weeks. A youth coordinator quietly resigning with no explanation. Vendors leaving angry voicemails about unpaid invoices. Then came the charity gala. Tanisha hosted it at the Plaza Hotel, a glittering affair with ice sculptures and a 10-piece orchestra. Tickets sold for $500 a plate, all proceeds supposedly going to underserved communities. Becca saw the photos on Instagram. Tanisha in a silver gown, posing with city council members and celebrities, her smile wide and practiced. What Tanisha's followers didn't see was the email Becca received 2 days later from Marcus, a former outreach center employee she'd stayed in touch with. Becca, something's not right. The gala raised $340,000. Only $40,000 made it to actual programs. The rest vanished into administrative costs. Thought you should know. Becca sat in her office at Poor Grace headquarters, a modest space above the Astoria location, and read the message 3 times. She wasn't surprised, just tired. Tired of watching her father's legacy get strip-mined for profit. Tired of watching a woman who preached humility wear designer labels. Tired of the performance. But she didn't act. Not yet. She simply forwarded the email to a folder labeled Records and went back to reviewing expansion contracts. The truth she'd learned from her father always revealed itself. You just had to be patient. 3 months later, the first rail crack appeared. Channel 7's investigative unit ran a segment titled, Faith or Fraud? Questions surround Harlem megachurch's finances. Becca watched it alone in her apartment, coffee in hand, her father's Bible open on her lap. The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Jasmine Torres, stood outside Greater Faith with a microphone. Madam Tanisha Tomlin has become a household name in New York's faith community. But documents obtained by Channel 7 suggest serious financial irregularities at her nonprofit organization. Cut to spreadsheets on screen, circles drawn around suspicious transactions. Grant money meant for homeless shelters, redirected to personal accounts. Donations from the charity gala, unaccounted for. And multiple former employees who say they worked for months without pay. The camera cut to a former volunteer, face blurred, voice disguised. She used us. Made us think we were serving God, but really we were just serving her ego. Becca took a slow sip of coffee. On screen, Jasmine Torres continued. We reached out to Madame Tomlin for comment. Her legal team provided this statement. Text appeared, these allegations are baseless attacks on a woman of God who has dedicated her life to service. We will vigorously defend against any false claims. But the camera caught something the statement didn't. A brief clip of Tanisha leaving the church, surrounded by bodyguards, her face tight with barely controlled fury. Becca watched that moment 3 times. The truth always tithes in full, she murmured to the empty room. Her phone buzzed. A text from Keisha. You seeing this? Your stepmom is all over the news. Becca didn't respond. She set the phone face down and returned to the Bible in her lap, her father's Bible, the one he'd kept on his nightstand, margins filled with his handwriting. She'd taken it from the house the day she moved out, one of the few things Tanisha hadn't noticed missing. Now she turned to Proverbs, where a folded piece of paper marked a page. She found it weeks ago, tucked between the verses like a secret message in a bottle. The note was in her father's handwriting, dated 2 months before he died. Becca, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from what's coming. Tanisha isn't who I thought she was. I've seen the bank statements, the hidden accounts. I was going to file for divorce, but then I got sick. I've changed the will back to include you, with Lawrence's help. But if something happens before it's finalized, remember this. Grace isn't just forgiveness. It's the power to grow in the dark. The seed I planted with you will outlast anything she builds on lies. I love you. I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry. Dad. Becca's hands trembled as she reread the words. Change the will back. Before it's finalized. So Tanisha had gotten to him first. Changed it again, probably forged his signature while he was too weak to fight back. Becca closed the Bible slowly, pressing her palm against the worn leather cover. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello. Ms. Tomlin. A male voice, strained and formal. This is Lawrence Chin. I need to speak with you. In person. It's urgent. They met at a diner in Queens, far from Manhattan's prying eyes. Lawrence looked like he hadn't slept in days. Tie loosened, eyes bloodshot, hands shaking around his coffee cup. I should have told you at the reading, he said without preamble. But I was afraid. Becca waited. Your father came to me 6 weeks before he died. He wanted to change his will, back to the original version. The one that left everything to you, with Tanisha as a secondary beneficiary. Becca's heart stopped. Then why? Because he died before we could finalize it. And Tanisha, she found the old version. The one that favored her. She claimed it was his most recent wishes. Lawrence's voice dropped to a whisper. I think she forged the date, but I couldn't prove it. And she threatened to destroy my practice if I contested it. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere, a jukebox played Motown. Why are you telling me this now? Becca asked. Because it's all falling apart. Lawrence pulled out his phone, showing her a text message. She called me this morning. The church is facing foreclosure. She mismanaged the expansion funds. Took out loans she can't repay. The bank is threatening to seize the property. Becca stared at the screen. The church, her father's church, the one he'd built from nothing, about to be auctioned off to pay Tanisha's debts. When? She asked quietly. 30 days. Maybe less. Lawrence met her eyes. I'm sorry, Rebecca. For everything. Your father would be ashamed of me. Becca stood, leaving cash on the table for her untouched coffee. Maybe, she said. But shame doesn't change the past. Only the future does. She walked out into the winter cold, her father's watch heavy on her wrist, his words echoing in her mind. The seed I planted will outlast anything she builds on lies. 30 days. Becca pulled out her phone and called Patricia Wong. It's time, she said when the lawyer answered. I want to make an offer. The courthouse steps were crowded with vultures in business suits. Real estate developers clutched briefcases and murmured into Bluetooth earpieces. Investment firms sent junior associates to scout the deal. Even a few church groups had shown up, hoping to acquire the property for their own congregations. And cameras. Always cameras. The foreclosure auction of Greater Faith Deliverance Church had become a media spectacle. Fall of a saint, the tabloids called it. Every news outlet in the city wanted to capture the moment Madame Tanisha Tomlin lost her kingdom. Becca arrived early, slipping through the back entrance in a charcoal coat and dark sunglasses. She pulled her hair into a low bun, makeup minimal, presence intentionally forgettable. Patricia Wong walked beside her, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the expression of someone who'd won cases in far tougher rooms than this. "You sure about this?" Patricia asked as they found seats in the back row of the auction hall. Becca removed her sunglasses, folding them carefully. "I've never been more sure of anything." The room filled quickly, speculators, journalists, curious onlookers. Becca recognized a few faces from her father's funeral, people who'd praised Tanisha's strength while ignoring Becca's grief. Then the doors opened, and Tanisha made her entrance. She wore white, always white, with a double strand of pearls and matching earrings that caught the fluorescent light. Her hair was styled in soft waves, her makeup flawless despite the circumstances. She moved through the room like a queen entering her throne room, not a woman about to lose everything. Two lawyers flanked her, both grim-faced. Behind them, Deacon Morris and First Lady Campbell followed like loyal guards, their expressions a mixture of concern and performance. Tanisha took a seat in the front row, directly in the auctioneer's line of sight. She crossed her legs, straightened her spine, and arranged her face into serene composure. Then she turned, scanning the crowd, and her eyes landed on Becca. For a moment, just a heartbeat, something flickered across Tanisha's face. Surprise? Contempt? Fear? But it vanished behind her practiced smile. She turned back to face forward, dismissing Becca's presence with the ease of someone swatting a fly. Becca didn't react. She simply folded her hands in her lap and waited. The auctioneer, a middle-aged man with a gray mustache and reading glasses, stepped to the podium and cleared his throat. "Good afternoon. We're here for the public auction of the property located at 147 Malcolm X Boulevard, including the church building, adjacent fellowship hall, and parking facility. Total lot size, 1.2 acres. Opening bid starts at $1.8 million. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. It was a steal. The property was easily worth $4 million in the current market. A hand shot up in the second row. 1.8. 1.9. Someone countered from the left. 2 million. A developer in the front called out. The bidding climbed quickly, voices overlapping, hands rising. Tanisha sat motionless, her jaw tight, her hands clutching her purse like a lifeline. 2.2 million. 2.3. 2.4. The auctioneer's gavel punctuated each bid like a countdown. Becca watched the numbers climb, watched Tanisha's shoulders grow more rigid with each increase. At 2.7 million, most bidders dropped out. Only 3 remained, a development corporation, a community investment group, and a mystery bidder represented by a woman on a phone in the corner. 2.8 million, the developer called. 2.9, the investment group countered. The woman in the corner spoke into her phone, listened, then raised her hand. 3 million. Gasps scattered through the room. The developer shook his head and sat down. The investment group representative hesitated, then also withdrew. The auctioneer looked around. 3 million going once. Tanisha's lawyer leaned over and whispered something urgent in her ear. She shook her head, lips pressed into a thin line. 3 million going twice. Becca felt Patricia's hand touch her arm gently. This was it. She stood, her movement fluid and unhurried. 3.2 million. The room went silent. Every head turned. The auctioneer squinted toward the back. "I'm sorry, miss, I need your bidder registration." Patricia stood beside Becca, holding up a paddle. "Number 47. Poor Grace Holdings, LLC. Funds verified and available." More murmurs. The woman on the phone looked shocked. The remaining bidders exchanged confused glances. And Tanisha turned slowly in her seat, her face a mask of confusion. "Poor Grace Holdings," she said, loud enough for the front rows to hear. A dismissive laugh escaped her lips. Another greedy developer swooping in to exploit sacred ground. How predictable. She turned back to the auctioneer. This property is more than real estate. It's a house of God. I pray whoever buys it remembers that. The performance was perfect, righteous indignation wrapped in holy concern. A few people nodded in sympathy. The auctioneer adjusted his glasses. Do we have any counterbids to 3.2 million? Silence. Going once. The woman on the phone shook her head and sat down. Going twice. Tanisha's hands trembled on her purse, but her face remained composed. Sold. To bidder number 47, Poor Grace Holdings LLC, for $3.2 million. The gavel struck. Final. Irrevocable. Applause scattered through the room, mostly from reporters and spectators who didn't understand what they just witnessed. Tanisha stood, preparing to leave, her lawyers already moving toward the exit. She'd maintain her dignity, make a statement to the press about God's will and new beginnings. But then Becca spoke. That's me. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like a blade through silk. The room went still. Tanisha froze mid-step. Slowly, so slowly, she turned. Becca walked down the center aisle, Patricia beside her, every eye following her movement. She'd removed her coat, revealing a crimson blouse that seemed to glow under the courthouse lights. Her father's watch gleamed on her wrist. She stopped 3 feet from Tanisha. Poor Grace Holdings, Becca said quietly, her voice steady as stone. That's my company. I'm the winning bidder. Tanisha's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. You can. I can. Becca tilted her head slightly. I did. Gasps erupted. Camera shutters exploded in rapid fire. Reporters surged forward, questions overlapping. Ms. Tomlin, how long have you owned? Is this revenge for the will? Madam Tanisha, did you know? But Becca ignored them all. Her eyes stayed locked on Tanisha's, watching the realization dawn like a slow-motion car crash. You. Tanisha's voice cracked. You don't have that kind of money. You're nobody. Becca smiled, small, sad, true. You taught me to build on faith, Madam Tanisha. I just didn't use yours. The words landed like a final gavel strike. Tanisha stumbled backward, caught by Deacon Morris. Her pearls trembled at her throat. Her perfect composure shattered, revealing something raw and desperate beneath. This is impossible. Jerome didn't leave you anything. You had nothing. I had enough, Becca said simply. I had what mattered. She turned to the auctioneer, who stood frozen with his clipboard. Where do I sign? Patricia stepped forward with a portfolio, producing documents already prepared, funds already verified. Becca took the pen, the same hand that had once held a cardboard box of her belongings, the same hand that had refused a $500 check, and signed her name in bold, clear strokes across the deed. The church was hers. The legacy was hers. The truth was hers. Behind her, Tanisha sank into her chair, surrounded by lawyers and allies who suddenly looked uncertain about their loyalty. Camera flashes painted the scene in bursts of white light, the fall of a false saint, the rise of a forgotten daughter. Becca handed the pen back to Patricia, then turned one last time to face Tanisha. The building will remain a church, she said quietly. But from now on, you'll be renting it from me. I'll have my lawyer send over the lease terms. She walked toward the exit, Patricia at her side, reporters shouting questions she didn't answer. At the door, she paused and looked back. Tanisha sat hunched in her white suit, surrounded by wreckage, her kingdom reduced to ashes. And for the first time in years, Becca felt something she'd almost forgotten. Peace. Not revenge. Not triumph. Just peace. She stepped out into the winter afternoon, where the sun broke through the clouds in shafts of gold, and felt her father's watch press against her pulse. Still broken, still frozen at 11:47, but somehow finally right where it belonged. The headline hit before Becca even made it home. Pastor loses church to stepdaughter she disowned. By the time she walked into her apartment, her phone had 17 missed calls, 43 texts, and 3 voicemails from reporters offering 6-figure sums for exclusive interviews. She silenced the phone and set it face down on the kitchen counter. On her laptop, the story had already gone nuclear. Every major news outlet had picked it up. Social media was ablaze. The video from the courthouse, shaky phone footage of Becca saying, "That's me," and Tanisha's face crumbling, had been viewed 4 million times in 3 hours. Becca watched it once, then closed the browser. She made herself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the city lights blink on as dusk settled over Queens. Her phone buzzed again. This time she looked. A text from Keisha, girl. You're a whole legend right now. You okay? Becca typed back, I'm okay. Just tired. Another bus. Patricia, don't talk to anyone. Let them speculate. Silence is power. Becca smiled faintly. Patricia was right. She had no intention of speaking. The truth didn't need her commentary. It was loud enough on its own. By Sunday, Greater Faith Deliverance Church was half empty. The service still happened. Tanisha insisted, despite her lawyer's advice to lay low. She stood at the pulpit in her signature white, but the light seemed harsher now, exposing the cracks in her foundation makeup, the tension in her smile. We are facing trials, she began, voice trembling with what might have been genuine emotion or exceptional acting. But trials are just testimonies in the making. God is testing our faith. In the third row, Sister Caroline whispered to her husband, God didn't test nothing. She got caught. They weren't the only ones questioning. Where rows of faithful had once packed the sanctuary shoulder to shoulder, now there were gaps. Empty pews like missing teeth. After the service, Deacon Morris found Tanisha in her office, staring at her phone. People are leaving, he said carefully. The Johnsons. The Patels. Even the youth choir director submitted her resignation. Tanisha looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. They'll come back. Once this blows over. It's not going to blow over. Morris set a folder on her desk. The Attorney General opened an investigation. They're looking into the charity funds. The gala money. All of it. Tanisha's hand flew to her throat, fingers closing around her pearls. That's harassment. This is a witch hunt because I'm a black woman in power. No. Morris's voice was firmer than she'd ever heard it. This is accountability. And it's been a long time coming. He walked out without another word. Tanisha sat alone in her office, Jerome's office, really, though she redecorated it beyond recognition, and felt the walls closing in. Online, the story had taken on a life of its own. Twitter was merciless. At Truth-Teller 404, she called her a charity case. Now she's the landlord. God really said, watch this, face with tears of joy. At Faith and Receipts, y'all remember when Tanisha handed her $500 at the will reading? Becca just spent $3.20 million. That's called generational wealth, sis. At Poetic Justice Daily, Madam Tanisha really thought she could steal a man's legacy and God would just let it slide? Baby, the Lord works in esperanza. At Shamoy's Gospel, the way Becca stayed quiet this whole time, built an empire in secret, then showed up at the auction in red? Cinema. Pure cinema. The comments kept coming, each more pointed than the last. God doesn't like ugly. You can't pray away karma. She preached grace but practiced greed. TikTok exploded with reaction videos, people reenacting the That's Me moment, ministers breaking down the theological irony, financial experts explaining how Becca had quietly built a multi-million-dollar business while Tanisha squandered Jerome's legacy. One video, posted by a young woman named it Storytime with Sydney, went particularly viral. Let me tell you why this story is biblical. Becca is literally Joseph, thrown out by her family, left for dead basically, but God was working in the secret place. And when the famine came, when Tanisha's empire collapsed, guess who had the grain? Becca had the grain, y'all. 15 million views, 50,000 comments, all saying the same thing. Justice. By Wednesday, the dam broke completely. An anonymous source leaked Tanisha's bank records to Channel 7. Jasmine Torres stood outside Greater Faith with documents in hand, her expression grave. According to records obtained by our investigative team, Madam Tanisha Tomlin diverted over $800,000 in grant money meant for community programs into personal accounts. Additional funds from the charity gala, originally reported as donated to homeless services, were used for luxury purchases, including a $75,000 car and a timeshare in the Bahamas. Cut to receipts, bank transfers, credit card statements. The Attorney General's office has confirmed they are pursuing charges of charity fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. The story aired at 6 p.m. By 7 p.m., Tanisha's house was surrounded by news vans. By 8 p.m., her legal team had issued a statement denying all allegations. By 9 p.m., no one believed them. Through it all, Becca said nothing. Reporters camped outside her apartment building. They ambushed her outside Poor Grace locations. They called, emailed, sent letters. She declined every interview. When a producer from a major morning show offered her a primetime special, she replied through Patricia, "Ms. Tomlin has no comment and requests privacy during this time." Her silence became its own story. The woman who forgave in silence. Rebecca Tomlin's quiet power. Why Becca Tomlin's refusal to gloat makes her victory even sweeter. In a world of clapbacks, one woman chose grace. Opinion pieces praised her composure. Social media called her a role model. Pastors used her as a sermon illustration about faith and patience. And through it all, Becca simply went to work. She reviewed lease agreements with Patricia. She met with architects about renovating the church. She visited her cafe locations, hugged her staff, poured coffee, and listened to customer stories. One afternoon, an elderly woman approached her at the Astoria location. "You're her, aren't you? The one from the news?" Becca hesitated, then nodded. The woman took her hand. "Baby, I've been praying for you. What you did, that wasn't revenge. That was restoration. Your daddy would be proud." Becca's throat tightened. "Thank you. And that woman who hurt you?" The woman squeezed her hand. "God's handling her just fine without your help. You just keep walking in your purpose." Becca nodded, unable to speak. The woman smiled, patted her cheek, and walked away. That night, Becca sat in her apartment with her father's Bible open on her lap. She'd been reading through his notes again, his wisdom scribbled in the margins. Next to Proverbs 11 verse 2, "When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom," he'd written. True power isn't in the noise you make. It's in the peace you keep. Becca traced the words with her finger, then closed the book gently. Outside her window, the city hummed with life, sirens and laughter, arguments and music, all of it blending into the symphony of survival. Somewhere across town, Tanisha was probably pacing her bedroom, watching her empire crumble on every screen. But Becca wasn't thinking about Tanisha anymore. She was thinking about tomorrow. About the architects' meeting. About the youth center plans. About the future her father had believed in before he ever saw it. She touched his watch, still broken, still frozen, and whispered into the quiet, "I kept the seed alive, Daddy. Now watch it grow." Spring came to Harlem like a promise kept. The scaffolding came down from 147 Malcolm X Boulevard on a Tuesday morning in late April, revealing a building transformed. The old church sign was gone, replaced by elegant lettering in brushed bronze. The Tomlin Center for Youth Empowerment. Beneath it, in smaller script, "In memory of Jerome Tomlin, a man who planted seeds." Becca stood across the street, coffee in hand, watching the workers remove the last of the construction barriers. Beside her, Patricia Wong reviewed documents on her tablet, occasionally glancing up to admire their work. "The permit's all cleared," Patricia said. "We're officially open for business." "Well, officially open for community service." Becca smiled. "There's a difference. With you?" "Never quite sure." Patricia closed her tablet. "The city's thrilled, by the way. Youth programs, job training, free legal clinics, mental health services. You're doing what Tanisha only pretended to do." "I'm doing what my father started," Becca corrected quietly. The building looked different now. The ostentatious gold fixtures were gone, replaced with warm wood tones and natural light. The sanctuary had been converted into a multipurpose space, basketball courts that could transform into an auditorium, with retractable seating and a stage for performances. The fellowship hall became a computer lab and library. The pastor's office, Tanisha's former throne room, was now a counseling center. It didn't look like a church anymore. It looked like hope with a roof. "Ready to go inside?" Patricia asked. Becca nodded, finishing her coffee. "Let's see what we built." Inside, the transformation was even more striking. Where stained glass had once filtered colored light onto expensive marble, now floor-to-ceiling windows let in natural sunlight that warmed the polished hardwood floors. Young people, teenagers mostly, moved through the space with easy confidence, some heading to the computer lab, others shooting hoops, a few gathered around tables working on homework. A girl with box braids and headphones looked up as Becca entered, did a double take, then smiled. "Yo, you're the owner, right? Ms. Tomlin." Becca paused. I am. This place is fire. Like actually life-changing fire. The girl stood, extending her hand. I'm Destiny. I'm in the coding boot camp program. Free, by the way, which is insane. Thank you. Becca shook her hand, warmth spreading through her chest. You're welcome. How's the program? Hard. But good hard, you know. Like the kind that's building something. Destiny grinned. My counselor says I could get an internship this summer. Real money. College credits. That's wonderful. Yeah. Destiny adjusted her headphones. My mom used to bring me to this church when it was, before. We stopped coming after everything came out about that pastor lady. But this, she gestured around, this feels different. Feels real. She headed back to her computer, leaving Becca standing in the middle of the transformed sanctuary, feeling her father's presence like sunlight on her shoulders. Ms. Tomlin. She turned to find Marcus, the former Outreach Center employee who'd first alerted her to Tanisha's financial crimes. He wore a staff badge now, clipboard in hand, a genuine smile on his face. Marcus. Becca's face lit up. How's your first week? Honestly, best job I've ever had. He gestured around. Fair pay, clear mission, leadership that actually cares. It's like working for your dad again. The way it should have been all along. Becca had rehired 5 former staff members, people Tanisha had underpaid or exploited. She'd offered them competitive salaries, benefits, and most importantly, dignity. We're just getting started, Becca said. There's so much more to do. I know. And we're here for it. Marcus checked his clipboard. Speaking of which, the after-school program starts next week. We've got 40 kids registered. The parents are, well, they're grateful. Some of them cried during orientation. Becca's throat tightened. Why? Because somebody finally saw them. Saw their kids. Treated them like they mattered. Marcus met her eyes. You did that. Your dad would be proud. That afternoon, Patricia found Becca in what used to be Tanisha's office, now a bright, plant-filled counseling space with comfortable chairs and warm lighting. I've been fielding calls all morning, Patricia said, settling into one of the chairs. Major outlets want interviews. Good Morning America, NPR. Even Oprah's team reached out. Becca looked up from the desk where she'd been reviewing program budgets. What did you tell them? That you're not interested. But Becca, Patricia leaned forward. This is an opportunity. Your story is resonating with millions of people. You could use that platform to what? Becca interrupted gently. To explain myself. To justify what I did. To make Tanisha the villain in some public narrative. She made herself the villain. I know. Becca set down her pen. But my father taught me something, Patricia. He said that the loudest voice in the room isn't always the most powerful one. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let your work speak for itself. Patricia studied her for a long moment. You really are going to say anything, are you? Some things speak louder in silence, Becca said simply. Patricia smiled, shaking her head with admiration. You're either the wisest person I know or the most stubborn. Can it be both? They both laughed, a real warm sound that filled the room with something Tanisha's version of this office had never held, joy. As evening settled over the city, Becca walked through the now quiet center, checking locks and turning off lights. In the main hall, she paused by a display case she'd installed near the entrance. Inside sat 2 items, carefully arranged on black velvet. On the left, a faded photograph of her father standing outside his original community center, the small, humble building he'd started with 30 years ago, before Tanisha, before expansion, before everything got complicated. He wore work clothes and a wide smile, his arm around a young Becca who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. On the right, the first coffee cup from Poor Grace Cafe, stained, chipped, but precious. The one her father had drunk from that morning at her cart 7 years ago. The one he kept on his desk as a reminder that small beginnings could lead to extraordinary things. Becca touched the glass, her reflection overlapping with her father's photo. We did it, Daddy, she whispered. Not the way you planned, maybe. But we did it. Behind her, footsteps approached. She turned to find an older woman from the neighborhood, Mrs. Chen, who'd lived on this block for 40 years. I'm sorry, we're closing, Becca began. I know, baby. I just wanted to see it. Mrs. Chen looked around the space, tears in her eyes. My grandson will come here. learn computers, maybe stay out of trouble. Because of you, because of my father, Becca corrected. No. Mrs. Chen took her hand. Because of you. Your father planted the seed. But you gave it water, sunlight, and room to grow. That's just as important. She squeezed Becca's hand and shuffled toward the exit, leaving Becca alone with her father's photo and her own reflection in the glass. Outside, the street lights flickered on. The neighborhood settled into evening rhythms, music from open windows, the smell of someone's dinner, children's laughter carrying on the spring breeze. Becca locked the door behind her and stood on the steps of the Tomlin Center, looking out at the community her father had loved and she had fought to serve. Her phone buzzed. A text from Keisha. Saw the news feature on the sender. You're changing lives, sis. Coffee's on me tomorrow. Becca smiled, pocketing her phone. She touched her father's watch one last time, still broken, still frozen at 11:47, and realized something profound. Some things weren't meant to be fixed. Some things were meant to be honored exactly as they were. Imperfect, stopped in time, but still beautiful, still meaningful, still loved. She walked down the steps and into the evening, carrying her father's legacy forward, not in headlines or interviews or public declarations, but the quiet, steady work of planting seeds and watching them grow. The way he taught her. The way it was always meant to be. 6 months later, on a warm October evening, the Tomlin Center hummed with life. Becca stood in the back of what had once been the sanctuary, watching the scene unfold before her with quiet wonder. The space had been transformed for tonight's event, the first annual Youth Voices Showcase, where young people from the neighborhood would share their stories through poetry, spoken word, and music. Folding chairs filled the floor, packed with families who'd never felt welcome in this building when it was Tanisha's domain. Now they sat with plates of food from the community potluck, children on laps, grandmothers fanning themselves, teenagers recording everything on their phones. On stage, a 13-year-old girl named Amara stood at the microphone, her hands shaking slightly as she held a crumpled paper. This poem is called Seeds, she announced, her voice small but determined. The room quieted. My mama says some people plant flowers / just to watch them die / but my teacher says / some people plant trees / they'll never sit under / just so their children can have shade. Becca felt tears prick her eyes. I think my neighborhood is like that / full of people who planted things / in concrete / and somehow they grew anyway. Applause erupted. Amara's mother stood, wiping her eyes, clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. The girl rushed off stage into her mother's arms, both of them laughing and crying at once. Becca watched from the shadows, her heart full to breaking. This was why she'd fought. Not for revenge. Not even for justice, really. For Amara's poem. For the shade of trees planted by people who'd never rest beneath them. Marcus appeared beside her, holding 2 cups of punch. You hiding back here? Observing, Becca corrected, accepting the cup. He nodded toward the stage where a boy was now beatboxing while his friend rapped. You did this, you know. None of this happens without you. My father did this, Becca said automatically. No. Marcus turned to face her fully. Your father dreamed it. Tanisha corrupted it. But you restored it. There's a difference between inheriting something and actually honoring it. Before Becca could respond, Patricia Wong materialized from the crowd, phone in hand, expression somewhere between amused and exasperated. They're outside again, she said. Who? The reporters. 3 vans this time. They heard about tonight's event. They want a statement. Becca sighed. 6 months later, and the interest hadn't died down. If anything, the story had grown. Think pieces about generational wealth, investigations into nonprofit fraud, even a podcast series called Saints and Secrets that had gone viral. Tell them. I know. No comment. Patricia pocketed her phone. But Becca, eventually you're going to have to say something. People want to hear from you. They can hear from this. Becca gestured to the showcase, to the children laughing, to the community healing. This speaks louder than I ever could. Patricia studied her for a moment, then smiled. Your father raised someone special. He raised someone who listens, Becca corrected softly. After the showcase ended and families began filtering out into the autumn night, Becca walked through the emptying space, collecting stray programs and straightening chairs. She moved slowly, savoring the quiet after the noise, the way the building held echoes of laughter like a blessing. She made her way to the front, where the altar had once stood, where Tanisha had preached her polished sermons. Now it was just an open space with a simple wooden table, flowers and mason jars, and a wall of photographs showing the center's journey. Becca reached into her bag and pulled out a frame she'd been carrying all evening. Another photo of her father, this one from 5 years ago, a community barbecue he'd organized. He wore a ridiculous apron that said Grill Master and was laughing at something off camera, his whole face lit with joy. She placed it carefully on the table, adjusting it until it sat just right among the flowers. "You said the seed was planted, Daddy," she whispered, her voice echoing softly in the empty space. "I just gave it sunlight." She stood there for a long moment, hands resting on the table, feeling his presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. The front doors opened, and Keisha walked in with her 2 kids, 7 and 9, both wearing Tomlin Center t-shirts they'd gotten tonight. "We're headed out," Keisha said, then noticed Becca at the altar. She ushered her children toward the exit but paused at the door. "You good?" Becca turned, smiling. "I'm perfect." "Yeah, you are." Keisha grinned. "See you Monday." "See you Monday." The doors closed, leaving Becca alone again. She took one last look around, at the space her father had built, Tanisha had corrupted, and she had redeemed. At the future being written in poetry and laughter and second chances. Then she gathered her things and headed for the exit. Outside, the news vans were indeed waiting. 3 of them, cameras already rolling as she stepped into the cool evening air. Reporters surged forward, microphones extended like offerings. "Ms. Tomlin, how does it feel to transform your stepmother's church? Are you satisfied with the Attorney General's charges against Madame Tanisha? Will you ever reconcile with your family? What message do you have for people facing similar betrayals?" Becca paused on the steps, backlit by the warm light spilling from the center behind her. For a moment, she considered it, giving them the sound bite they wanted, the narrative they craved. But then she remembered her father's voice. The loudest voice in the room isn't always the most powerful one. She smiled, not the practiced, performative smile Tanisha had perfected, but a real one, small and true. "No comment," she said gently. "But thank you for your interest." She descended the steps with quiet grace, Patricia appearing from somewhere to run interference, and together they walked toward the street where Becca's car was parked. Behind them, reporters called out more questions, but she didn't turn back. She'd said everything that needed saying. The rest was just noise. Later that night, Becca sat in her apartment with a cup of tea, her father's Bible open on her lap. She'd been reading through his notes again, finding new wisdom in the familiar passages. On the last page, in his distinctive handwriting, she found words she'd somehow missed before. "Becca, by the time you read this whole book, you'll probably have figured out that inheritance isn't about what you're given. It's about what you choose to do with it. That's what I'm leaving you. Not money or buildings or things. Just peace. And the knowledge that you are always enough. Love, Dad." Becca closed the book slowly, pressing it against her chest as tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. Outside her window, the city continued its eternal rhythm, sirens and music, arguments and laughter, all the beautiful chaos of millions of lives intersecting. Somewhere across town, Tanisha was living with the consequences of her choices. Becca didn't know if she felt regret or resentment, and truthfully, she didn't need to know. That was Tanisha's journey now. Becca had her own path to walk, one paved with coffee shops and youth centers, with second chances and planted seeds, with her father's wisdom and her own hard-won peace. She touched the watch on her wrist one final time, then carefully removed it and placed it on her nightstand beside her father's photo. It was still broken, still frozen at 11:47. But maybe that was okay. Maybe some things weren't meant to keep time. Maybe some things were meant to hold it, to preserve a single perfect moment forever, like a prayer pressed between pages. Becca turned off the light and settled into bed, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Not just peace. Home. She'd finally found her way home, not to a building or a place, but to herself. To the truth her father had always known. She was the seed and the sunlight both. She was the inheritance and the legacy. She was enough. And that, in the end, was everything. If you believe that true inheritance isn't about what's written on paper, but what lives in your purpose, hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family legacies, hidden fortunes, and the kind of justice that doesn't need to shout to be heard. And before you go, check out the 2 videos showing on your screen right now. These stories were crafted specially for you. Remember, some inherit property, others inherit purpose, but the truest inheritance is peace.